Okay, good afternoon and to everybody, and good morning to our keynote speakers. Okay, a pleasant day to all. And on behalf of the FFN Regionalization Committee and the FFN Hip Fracture Recovery Research Special Interest Group, I would like to welcome you to the FFN Asia Pacific Third Packet Meeting, hosted virtually by FFN Philippines and the University of the Philippines Manila Department of Rehabilitation Medicine, with the support of the UP Manila Department of Orthopedics and the UP Manila National Institutes of Health Institute of Aging. It's my pleasure to introduce the chairs of the first part of our meeting. First, I'd like to introduce a board member of FFN Philippines. She's a rehabilitation fall specialist and a clinical associate professor of the University of the Philippines Manila Department of Rehabilitation Medicine, Dorothy Dichingbing Agsaway. And of course, her partner for this first part of the meeting, the co-lead of the FFN Hip Fracture Recovery Research Special Interest Group, who is also a rehabilitation medicine specialist and a professor of the Department of Rehab Medicine at the Seoul National University College of Medicine, as well as the director of the Aging and Mobility Biophysics Lab in Seoul National University, Bundang Hospital, our good friend, Jaeyang Lim. So Dorothy and Jaeyang, I'll give the screen to you.
Hi, good day to all our participants, attendees, and of course, our speakers for this afternoon special third Asia Pacific Packet Meeting. So to start the ball rolling, I will introduce the person who will give the welcome remarks. I will introduce Dr. Sharon D. Ignacio. Dr. Sharon Ignacio is the chair of the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine, University of the Philippines, Philippine General Hospital. Professor Sharon concurrently holds the position of Professor 3 at the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine, College of Medicine, University of the Philippines, Manila. I shall give the floor to Dr. Sharon D. Ignacio.
So, greetings to everyone from the Philippines. We are truly honored to be part of this third virtual Asia-Pacific Fragility Fracture Network Pocket Meeting. This event is a testimony of the commitment of this organization in attaining its goal to provide the best possible care to its stakeholders and attaining its goal to drive fragility fracture care to a higher level in the healthcare system. Truly, the impact of fragility fractures can be devastating. It is said that osteoporosis, which affects 200 million people worldwide, causes one fragility fracture every 10 seconds. This figure shows the need to have a strong, dedicated alliance like Fragility Fracture Network to address the problems that result from these. As the saying goes, alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. The efforts of this network will come to fruition if we continue to act as one. Mabuhay and congratulations to the organizers of this event. Good day.
Thank you, Professor Sharon. Well said. And to give us an update on the global Fragility Fracture Network projects, Dr. Sharon will be followed by Professor David Marsh. He is an emeritus professor of orthopedics at University College London. Professor Dave is likewise the chair of the Fragility Fracture Network Regionalization Committee and the founding chair of the Fragility Fracture Network. Dr. David Marsh.
Thank you. Well, hello, everybody. As was said, I was the founding president of the FFN back in 2011 and been busy on it ever since. And at the moment, I am the chair of the Regionalization Committee, and Erwin Tabu is the deputy chair. Between us, we organise the national FFNs around the world. But the important thing is that we're all under the umbrella of the global FFN, of which we're both board members, and I want to tell you just very briefly what's going on at that global level. So the most important thing, as Erwin has already said, is that we're just coming up now to the 2021 Global Congress, which has got a really cracking program, which I urge you to look at on the global website, which is easy to find. If you just put in FFN fracture into Google, it's the first thing that comes up. And really, it's really urgent that you register for this. The registration fees are very modest, particularly if you do it before Tuesday, as Ewan said. That's the early bird rates. So, for example, a physiotherapist from the Philippines will get registered for the pre-Congress regional meeting based in Asia Pacific and 2 days of the Global Congress, all for the sum of €15, which is extremely good value. And when you register for the Congress, you will automatically become a member of Global FFN if you aren't already. The other thing to announce is that in the General Assembly on the second day of the Global Congress, we will be electing the next year's board and the officers. And that's all described in the on the website, and all members have received a letter. And if you need one, let us know. If you haven't had a letter but you'd like to stand for election, then let us know. We'll give you the letter. And the voting will be online from the 1st of September, so that the result can be announced at the General Assembly. So, as I said at the last pocket meeting, there's so much to tell you about, we couldn't fit it all into one meeting. So in the last report, which you can read at this website here, ask Bernie to send you that link if you can't get it right now. And we reported there about the most recent guides to action, the toolkits, clinical and policy toolkits, the hip fracture registry toolbox, which have all been produced in the last 12 months. We reported on the progress of national FFNs, of which there are now 20 in the world, many of them in Asia Pacific. We reported on an FLS Academy and Network in Europe, which is a joint project with the IOF, with whom we have a memorandum of understanding. We reported on the special interest groups, of which one of them is today's co-organizer, the rehabilitation one. We also mentioned, Jeff, vertebral fragility fracture, saying that it's going to be a very important part of our work in the next coming while. And we reported that we are in collaboration with the WHO's Decade of Healthy Aging. So we did all that last time, and I just want to give you 3 further little nuggets today that we didn't cover last time. The Corporate Advisory Council, the Orthogeriatrics Survey, and our communication strategy. We have set up a Corporate Advisory Council, which is a committee where our industry partners can discuss our strategic direction with our global leadership. The privilege of doing that comes with a substantial membership fee, and that is giving us the resources to invest in our infrastructure. So far, we've decided to spend some of it on a consultant, David Lee, who has a background in both in non-profit organizations and companies to do with osteoporosis and fragility fractures. And you'll be hearing more about him as he helps you to develop the Asia Pacific network. We've also appointed executive assistants so that the regionalization committee that Ewan and I run will have a lot more help and be more powerful, and the same thing will happen for the other subcommittees of the board soon. So the first meeting of the CAC itself will be held immediately after the Global Congress, and one of the main things we'll be discussing is the Global Orthogeriatrics Survey, which is going to be a development of FIRMAT, which many of you are already involved in. So the Global Orthogeriatrics Survey covers what we mean by orthogeriatrics, which is the whole of post-fracture care. And one thing that means is that it also includes secondary prevention. You have not finished treating this fracture until you have done something to prevent the next fracture, is our mantra. So we have our 3 pillars of post-fracture care: the acute episode, the rehabilitation, and the secondary prevention. And we want to survey the world to see how much of this whole orthogeriatric pathway is being implemented and what resources are there. And we will produce from that a world map rather similar to the IOF's Capture the Fracture map of FLS units. And this whole process is going to be kicked off at the Regionalisation Committee in the upcoming workshop in the upcoming Global Congress, where Erwin is one of the speakers and the other one is a geriatrician from Chile in Latin America. The communication strategy needs to be beefed up. We need to establish a communications committee alongside our existing education committee, scientific committee, and regionalisation committee. And we will be amending the Articles of Association in the General Assembly to allow this. The goal of the Communications Committee will be to promote externally our message, knowledge about the burden, evidence on how to treat and prevent, and information about the various toolkits and guides to action that we produce. But it will also serve a role internally to improve communication between the different leadership teams, of which today's meeting is an example, a collaboration between the national FFNs in Asia Pacific and the global rehabilitation special interest group. And we'll use all the methods at our disposal, including an expanded series of webinars to promote this communication. So finally, just to summarize, we are developing very rapidly and we needed to increase our administrative capacity. The funding from the Corporate Advisory Council will facilitate this. And a big element of our coming year's work is going to be a global survey of orthogeriatric post-fracture care. And our communication strategy will help to keep all this together. So there's lots to look out for. Please do register for the Global Congress and get involved in the FFN, both regionally, nationally, and globally. Thank you very much.
Hi, Professor Jae Yang.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the third AP-REM POCAM meetings. I'm so happy to be a co-chair with Dr. Dorothy in this session. As you noted, this is a special session prepared with the collaboration of Asia Pacific Regional Committee and Hip Fracture Recovery Research's Special Interesting Group. Hip Fracture Recovery Special Interesting Group is an active steering group of Fragility Fractal Network on hip fracture recovery issues. I'm a co-lead of this group with Dr. Kt Shinhan is the first speaker today. Multidisciplinary clinicians and researchers participate in this group. Today, we are really excited to have four fantastic speakers. They will talk about recent issue and on mobilization strategy and outcomes after hip fracture. Please type your question in the question section on your screen. Questions will be left to the short Q&A session after all presentation. I now have a great pleasure introducing our first speaker, Dr. Kt Shinhan. Dr. Kt Shinhan is a senior lecturer and UKRI Future Leaders Fellow at King's College London. She is a qualified physiotherapist and quantitative health services researcher with experience from Ireland, Canada, and UK. The Kt's research focuses on the use of secondary analysis data set to inform your approaches to rehabilitation for old adults with fragility fracture. Please.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jae Yang. So Dr. Kt will be followed by Professor Christensen. Professor Morten Christensen is a clinical professor at the Department of Clinical Medicine, University of Copenhagen, and Department of Physical and Occupational Therapy, Bispebjerg and Frederiksberg Hospital, Copenhagen, Denmark. Professor Morten holds a PhD focused on patients with hip fracture from Lund University, Sweden in 2010. He has published 85 peer-reviewed scientific papers. Dr. Christensen is also the co-lead of the Fragility Fracture Network Physiotherapy Special Interest Group, board member of the Danish Hip Fracture Database, and has given several lectures and presented multiple times at congresses on the topics of rehabilitation and outcome measures after hip fracture.
Okay, I'm now delighted to introduce our third speaker, Dr. Emma Sutton. She is the Assistant Professor of Physiotherapy at Coventry University, UK, and also pedi-physiotherapist. She completed her doctoral research on qualitative improvement in surgery with funding from the Health Foundation, a clinical lectureship on improved science in hip fracture care with clinical trial unit at University of Warwick. Emma chairs the West Midland Region Hub for UK Council for Allied Health Professional Research. She also one of the member advisory board of Hip Fracture Recovery Research Special Interest in Group.
Yes, last and not the least, as a lecturer for the first part of this activity is Dr. Antonio Alan Mangubat. Dr. Antonio Mangubat is an anesthetist, and he is also a board member of the Fragility Fracture Network Philippines. He is a clinical associate professor of the Department of Anesthesiology, University of the Philippines, Philippine General Hospital, and Section Chief of Orthopedic Anesthesia, UP-PGH. Professor Lon has special interest in orthogeriatrics and has the role of anesthesiologist in the geriatric population, as well as early recovery after surgery for neurosurgery and orthopedic surgery. So we will have the 4 speakers first and the lectures, and after which we will entertain your questions afterwards. Please don't forget to type in the chat box your questions for each speakers. Thank you.
So first, thank you for the opportunity to present today. Before I begin, I'll just briefly introduce myself. So I'm a health services researcher and a physiotherapist, and I'm based in London. My research interest lies with older adults, and in particular secondary analysis of audit and administrative data to inform quality improvement initiatives, as well as stratified approaches to rehabilitation across the care continuum and equity and access to rehabilitation research, as well as care delivery. The current work I'm going to talk about is funded by the NIH and use data from the UK Falls and Fragility Fracture Audit Programme. I worked with a fantastic team at Partnered Hospital, Guy's and St Thomas's, and also researchers from King's College London. I'm going to jump straight in with our key findings, and I'll then walk through the methods and the results that led to those findings, the limitations and next steps for the results and our research. So early mobilization led to earlier live discharge, survival and recovery at 30 days. We noted that while all patients benefited, those who presented with delirium, dementia, hypotension, poor pre-fracture function, and from residential care or nursing care were less likely to mobilise early. I'm going to move to a more detailed discussion of these key findings over the course of the presentation. So I've highlighted our results indicate early mobilisation is a good thing, but what do we actually mean by early mobilisation? So mobilisation is defined by the ability to sit or stand out of bed, and early is considered on the day of or the day after hip fracture surgery, while late is considered 2 or more days after surgery. This can seem quite a simple activity, but it's actually quite a challenge for many patients. And I think it's really well reflected in the following video, which features Sheila getting out of bed for the first time. So clinically, it's generally accepted that early mobilisation is a good thing. A NICE guidance supports early mobilisation. This acceptance is based on the hypothesis that early mobilisation could reduce post-operative complications and in turn increase survival, or it could reduce the loss of muscle strength that's induced by bed rest and in turn increase the chances of recovery. In the UK, early mobilisation is consistently achieved for around 70 to 80% of patients. However, there's considerable variation across hospitals, as evidenced in the graph here. So the blue bars represent each of 177 hospitals, and the y-axis indicates the proportion of patients mobilised early. While generally accepted that early mobilisation is beneficial, the scientific evidence is actually quite limited, and NICE guidance indicates further evidence is needed. In our preparation for this work, we conducted a series of consultations with 8 patients and carers at a local hospital supported by funding from the Research Design Service in London. We asked patients and their carers to describe their experiences of getting out of bed after their hip fracture surgery. Most were happy to get out of bed on the day of or day after their surgery, as they associated as getting up earlier with getting home earlier. Some carers felt that a failure to engage with early mobility would see their loved ones left behind and a reduced chance of recovery. So with this information in mind, we formulated the objective for our work, which was to determine whether mobilisation timing was associated with discharge and survival and recovery at 30 days after hip fracture. We examined data for over 135,000 patients with hip fracture from the National Hip Fracture Database linked to hospitalisation records for England and Wales. Our exposure was early mobilisation and the comparator was late mobilisation. We looked at outcomes including discharge, which was discharge to home or residential care, 30-day survival, 30-day recovery of ambulatory ability. So this ambulatory ability was defined as no change or an improvement in the measured ability to walk pre-fracture to 30 days post-fracture. Ability to walk was classified as indoors and outdoors or indoors only. We excluded those with no functional ambulation pre-fracture from our analysis of 30-day recovery. For our analysis of survival on discharge, we considered competing and censoring events. We calculated the cumulative incidence of discharge and estimated adjusted odds ratios. And for 30-day analyses, we defined a propensity score for mobilisation timing with respect to confounders, and then completed logistic regression models. We completed subgroup analyses with subgroups defined in advance based on the results of a series of qualitative interviews, consultations with patients and carers, and the results of a physiotherapy sprint audit in the UK. So for our 135,000 patients, the median age was 84 years. The majority were women, white, admitted from home, presenting with at least one major comorbidity and an intracapsular hip fracture. The largest proportion were freely mobile without aids before their fracture. They were admitted to a high volume hospital with an ASA grade of 3 between Monday to Friday and underwent surgery within the target time of 36 hours. So here in the graph on the y-axis, we see the cumulative incidence function for live discharge, so discharge to home or residential care, considering the competing risk of in-hospital death. The x-axis reflects post-operative inpatient days from day 1 to day 30 post-operatively. The dashed line reflects the 21% of patients who mobilised late, and the solid line reflects the 79% of patients who mobilised early. So we can see that early mobilisation was associated with a higher rate of live discharge each day for the first 30 days after surgery. So this graph takes into account the competing risk of death, but it doesn't consider other potential confounders. So we conducted a proportional odds regression model to adjust for those potential confounders. And overall, there was 25 potential confounders that we included in our modelling. And we estimated that early mobilisation led to a 2-fold increase in the adjusted odds of live discharge by 30 days post-operatively when compared to late mobilisation. Here, the pink rows reflect patients with a condition, with poor pre-fracture function or from residential care. The white rows reflect those without a condition, with better pre-fracture function or from home. This reflects the results of complete case analysis, so the number of patients varies for each of the subgroup analyses. We can see that the proportion of patients mobilised early favours those without each condition, with better pre-fracture function and from home. Among those mobilised early, we can see a higher rate of discharge per 1,000 patient days for those without each condition and with better pre-fracture function, and we see a higher rate of discharge for those admitted from residential care versus for those admitted from home. Among those mobilised late, we see a similar pattern, except for dementia, where there is a similar rate of discharge for those with and without dementia. So here we present the results adjusted for potential confounders and the competing risk of death for subgroups. So the y-axis reflects the selected subgroups. We've got pre-fracture residence, so home or residential care, pre-fracture mobility, indoors only or indoors and outdoors, hypotension, delirium and dementia, which are indicated by the presence of an ICD code in our data. The x-axis reflects the results of proportional odds of regression analyses of the cumulative incidence function to estimate the association between mobilisation timing and discharge. The dots reflect the odds ratios for each group, and the lines through the dots the 95% confidence intervals. The increased odds was greatest for those without dementia or delirium, able to walk outdoors and admitted from home. But really the take-home message is that irrespective of subgroup membership, early mobilisation led to earlier live discharge when compared to late mobilisation. It's likely subgroups don't occur in isolation. For example, those with dementia may also be more likely to present from residential care. So we did complete a further analysis to consider the additive role of subgroups, and those models suggested that only pre-fracture ambulation residents, when considered together, influence the association between mobilisation timing and discharge, with patients admitted from home with better ambulation more likely to be discharged early following early mobilisation than those admitted from residential care with poor ambulation. So next we move on to results for 30-day survival and recovery. So we had complete data for 126,897 patients for 30-day survival, and among these 79% mobilised early after their hip fracture surgery and 94% survived the 30 days post-admission. For survival at 30 days, early mobilisation was associated with a near twofold increase in the weighted odds of survival when compared to late mobilisation. We only had complete data for 33,273 patients for 30-day recovery. The recovery data is collected by clinicians at acute hospitals, with some hospitals being more likely or being more able to collect data than others, and therefore the data is likely not missing at random. So the analysis results are at a degree of risk of bias, and there are threats to external validity. So we need to be a little bit cautious with our interpretation of these results. So among those who were able to walk outdoors before their fracture, 85% of patients mobilised early and 9% recovered their pre-fracture ability to walk outdoors by 30 days. Among those who were only able to walk indoors before their fracture, 74% mobilised early and 79% recovered their pre-fracture ambulation ability, so indoors only, by 30 days post-admission. Early mobilisation was associated with a 25% increase in the weighted odds of recovery at 30 days for those who were able to walk outdoors before their fracture, and a 53% increase in the weighted odds of recovery at 30 days for those who were only able to walk indoors before their fracture. So what does this look like in terms of probabilities? So here the x-axis or horizontal axis reflect the probabilities of outcome events up to 100%. The top half of the y-axis reflects overall 30-day survival, and the bottom half reflecting 30-day recovery by pre-fracture ambulation, so indoor only or indoor and outdoor. Blue dots reflect early mobilisation and red dots late mobilisation. So for survival, early mobilisation was associated with a 3.8% increased probability of 30-day survival. For recovery, early mobilisation was associated with a 22.8% increased probability of 30-day recovery among those with outdoor ambulation pre-fracture, and a 10% increase in the probability of 30-day recovery among those with indoor ambulation only pre-fracture. So we'll declare the limitations of this work. As with all observation analyses, while we did adjust our analysis for over 25 potential confounders, there's still the potential for unobserved confounding. So for example, discharge may be influenced by other processes of care during the acute stay, such as weight-bearing status in relation to fracture stabilisation, or the occurrence of post-operative complications. We had a high proportion of loss to follow-up cases in the analysis of survival and discharge. Here I've presented the results from complete case analysis. We did complete sensitivity analyses to determine the extent to which data was sensitive to missingness for discharge and 30-day survival, and we found very similar findings. We didn't do this for 30-day recovery due to the likelihood of the data being not missing at random. For our subgroup analyses, we classified patients as with or without a given diagnosis, as we didn't really have any information related to the disease stage. This may have influenced the results. So, for example, a patient with new onset dementia may have a different chance of early mobilization and earlier discharge when compared to those with advanced or end-stage dementia. So, back to our first slide, early mobilization led to earlier live discharge, survival and recovery at 30 days. So we noted that early discharge is the top priority of patients in the immediate post-operative phase. The magnitude of the effect is actually very similar to that for other established policy indicators of quality of care after hip fracture surgery, such as early surgery or orthogeriatric co-management. So we propose that early mobilization should be incorporated as a measured indicator of quality in audits internationally. It would also be beneficial to capture reasons for failure to mobilize early to inform quality improvement initiatives. The observant members of the audience may have noted those without the conditions with better pre-fracture function and who were admitted from home saw even greater gains from early mobilization. However, the message really is that all patients, irrespective of subgroup membership, saw a benefit from early mobilization. Yet, we did note that those with conditions, with poorer function or from residential or nursing home were less likely to mobilize early. We didn't determine whether or not this variation was in fact warranted. Indeed, physios in our recent qualitative work indicated personalised care trumps protocolized care in certain scenarios, and this variation may reflect this. Alternatively, it might reflect an issue with resource. Patients with advanced dementia may require 2 members of staff to enable early mobilization, and this may not be available on weekends. And if this is the case, then it's an equity issue, and we do need to look to address these issues. So for our group, we're seeking a policy to embed early mobilization in UK practice formally. We're looking to disseminate the findings globally through initiatives such as this one to promote the uptake of early mobilization as a key performance indicator or as a care process internationally. And finally, we noted a low probability of recovering outdoor ambulation by 30 days, irrespective of mobilization timing. Rehabilitation beyond 30 days is required to support recovery, particularly those with better pre-fracture ambulation. In the UK, and I'm sure elsewhere, arrangements for ongoing community-based rehabilitation are often quite fragmented and highly variable, and they've been estimated by different international audits to be insufficient to meet the clinical need. So we're hoping to start to address this care gap by developing an intervention which is targeting supporting outdoor ambulation for older adults after hip fracture. So I'll just take this moment to say thank you very much for your time and for listening. We have published 2 papers related to the current work, and a third is currently under review. So I've left the references for those 2 papers on the screen, and the third one will be forthcoming. I'm very happy to answer any questions during the discussion or by email, or if you want to reach out to me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is available there too. So again, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Katie, for this enlightening lecture. Indeed, early mobilization is crucial, especially among all our geriatric patients. And I could see that there are certain factors or issues that are similar also that will have an effect in terms of the early mobilization of patients. And we will have some question and answer right after. We will entertain questions and answer right after the 4th lecture. And to continue, we have our second speaker, Professor Martin Christensen, to talk about mobilization throughout rehabilitation process and function on discharge.
Hi, and welcome to this part of the meeting. My name is Morten Tange Christensen. I'm a physical therapist and professor at the University of Copenhagen, and also working at one of the major hospitals in the Copenhagen area. And I would like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here and to be able to give a presentation on one of my favorite focus areas for about 20 years. So Well, also I am involved in 2 of the special interest group of the Fragility Fractal Network, and I'm a member of the scientific committee for the September Congress this year. The focus for my talk will be, as the title, mobilization throughout rehabilitation process and function on discharge. And it will be focused on the importance of a continued focus on enhancing the ambulatory status after the first post-operative mobilization. And also I'll go a little into the importance of pre-fracture function and other barriers and predictors of the early ambulatory status. And the evidence I will provide will be related to patients with hip fracture, as this was the group that I studied for many years. But I do consider that much of it will be also relevant for other fragility fracture groups, but that will be up to you to decide. So we already heard Dr. Sheehan talk about the importance of day. So this actually has been one of my main focus areas since I started out as a research assistant about 20 years ago, and where I, together with Dr. Foss, developed this score sheet. And the idea was that we, on a daily basis, could monitor the progress of individual patients' ambulatory status and focus on these 3 basic activities: getting in and out of bed, sit to stand from a chair, and walking. And we gave a score from 0 to 2, and 0 means you cannot do this. 1, with some kind of support guiding, and 2, independent of human assistance. So when reaching a score of 2 in each of these three activities, you get a score of 6 on a daily basis, which means that you are independent in basic mobility according to our definition. So, and this was transformed into this accumulated ambulation score. And it's important to say that this score has proven valid for use in all patients with hip fracture, and also in other patients group with a low mobility level. And at present, it actually got quite popular around the world. So it's translated into a large number of languages. And for this region, of course, English, but also Indonesian and Japanese versions are available. So, but back to the evidence. The first validation of this score was based on scores of the first 3 days. So we combined scores from day 1, 2, and 3 into a score from 0 to 18, and related this to mortality within 30 days of surgery. And as you can see, those that only got a score from 0 to 3 points, which means that they were almost not out of bed during the first 3 days. More than 30% of those died, while those with a score of 9 or more, all of them actually survived. So pretty strong association with a high early ambulatory status and surviving after hip fracture. We also, and this is not a big surprise, but as you see, we were interested, can this first 3 days say something about when this patient will be discharged from the acute hospital? And as you can see, those with a high ambulatory level, scores above 9, 93% of those were discharged directly back to their home within 2 weeks. So again, a strong associations with discharge destination for patients admitted from their own home. So we also tried to go a bit deeper into what are the factors that influence these patients' ability to be independently mobilized. And our focus for this study was anemia, which is quite common among these patients, both related to the fracture, but also in the days after surgery. And what we saw that the odds of being able to walk independently on day 3, it was actually reduced with 69% for patients experience any kind of anemia related to this cut point. And also there were other variables that influenced this performance, and that was age and a poor prefactor function, some level of dementia, medical complications, and having surgery with an intramedullary hip nail. So, but anemia was an independent factor. In a later study, we also asked patients, what are the factors limit your ability to get in and out of bed? You were able to do this before you fractured your hip. And there were many reasons, as you can see on the x-axis, but fatigue and pain were the most prominent factors influencing their ability to get out of bed on their own. So this was the early days after surgery, but we were also interested in seeing, does it matter if you reach an independent level at the time of hospital discharge? So this was focused on patient reaching a CAS of 6 or not. And as you can see on the figure, patients not reaching this level, 30% of them died within the first year, while this was only 12% for those reaching an independent level. And there also were other factors: older age, men, a high ASA score, and a low prefactor function also predicted mortality within the longer term. So, but the CAS was an independent factor. So, and we were interested is, well, what's the problem? Why can't they do this? And we looked into these 3 activities and found that what patients experienced most problematic actually was this getting in and out of bed, compared to sit to stand from a chair and walking. As you see here, there were very few of patients that actually reached independence in getting in and out of bed. And this was more or less confirmed in a study from another setting. So how can this be? How come the bed transfer seems most difficult? And some of the explanation might be found in this study, where we looked into the amount of edema, and you see the fractured leg, the right leg, it's quite swollen, and of course this gives patients problems with lifting it or moving it around in the bed and in and out of bed also. And we compared this with the muscle strength of the quadriceps, and we saw a huge loss of strength in the fractured limb, and both edema and the loss of strength was especially related to patients having a trochanteric fracture. So some of the explanation for this problem with getting in and out of bed might be found in seems to be related to the amount of edema and loss of muscle strength. Could be. So this was single center studies. The CAS also is used in the Danish hip fracture database. And in that perspective, it's used as a pre-fracture patients or proxy recall of their level before fracturing their hip. And about 80% of them are independent at that time. And then it's assessed again when patients leave the hospital. And also within the recent years, it's possible to use this score from the early mobilization. In the IRIS database, it's actually used to evaluate early mobilization, and also when patients leave the acute hospitals, similar to the Danish. So in this study, it was a 1-year cohort of more than 5,000 first-time hip fractures, and they should have both a score from before fracturing the hip and when leaving the hospital. And about 90% of patients actually had that, so that was pretty good. And our focus here on a national data set was the same as the previous study. CAS regained from pre-fracture at the time of discharge. Yes or no? Quite simple. And what we did see was that actually 60% of patients did not regain this level when leaving the acute hospital. And the overall 30-day post-discharge mortality was 8.3%. But only 3.5% if CAS was recovered, and 11.4% if their pre-fracture ambulatory status wasn't recovered. So quite a difference. And in adjusted analyses, the risk of death was 2.8 times higher if this CAS level wasn't regained. And also we saw a 26% increased risk of 30-day readmission to the hospital if not regained. So this seems to matter also on a national level. And we were also interested in, does it actually matter how many of these 6 points that you lose? So if you have 6 points before fracturing your hip, you are able to lose 6 points. If you have 5, you can only lose 5 points. So that was the calculation. And on the y-axis, you have the percentage of patients that died within 30 days of leaving the hospital. And as you can see, there's a pretty strong association with losing. The more points you lose, the greater risk of not surviving. So just 1 point actually seems to matter, looking at it with this perspective. So quite interesting. Correspondingly, in a just recently published paper, we used the same approach. It was this time a 4-year cohort. It was about 20,000 first-time hip fracture patients. And we were interested in, does this also matter in relation to having an infection? And as you can see, there was an increased risk for having a hospital-treated or community-treated infection within 30 days. And also specific analyses showed an increased risk for having a pneumonia, if not recovering the CAS level when leaving the acute hospital. And again, does it matter how many points you lose? Not as strong association as for mortality, but still loss of CAS points. If you lose 5 to 6 points, there seems to be a greater risk of having a pneumonia compared to not losing any points. So from 2 to more than 5% risk. So this really seems to matter. So jumping a bit, but I did mention the importance of the pre-fracture function during my talk. And there's different ways of monitoring this, but one way is the new mobility score. And it's actually used in the IRIS database, and importantly, it can be used for all patients with hip fracture. And it's focused on indoor walking, outdoor walking, and walking during shopping. So very important activities for these patients. And it provides a score from 0, you're not able to do this at all, to 9, which means that you are independently can do this without difficulty, and no 8 in all these 3 activities. So, and it has been used worldwide and in many different ways, but these 3 studies all also used the accumulated ambulation score, and they looked into how strong is this new mobility score in predicting the outcome of the CAS. And it proved to be a very strong predictor. So if you had a high level before fracturing using the new mobility score, your possibility of recovering a full CAS score of 6 also was increased. But again, there were also other factors, as you can see, and you recognize these for some of the previous slides, most of them. So summing up a little, there's no doubt, mobilize patient as early as possible is extremely important. But continued focus on the ambulatory status thereafter seems equally important, I think. And I think it's important that focus on individual short-term achievable goals to enhance confidence and motivation of each patient is really important. And a short-term goal could be recover of this basic mobility as presented during my talk. And also try to take restricting factors for independent mobility into consideration, and of course offer specific exercises relevant for recovering mobility. And in relation to that, there's a new guideline providing evidence for interventions and outcome measures across the continuum of care for these patients. And it's free access. Just a little from that guideline, it's a summary related to my talk, and recommend that PTs use the new mobility score to assess the pre-fracture and continued status thereafter across the continuum of care, and also recommend the early mobilization as soon as possible, and also thereafter, unless contraindicated for medical or surgical reasons, and also that patients are offered daily physical therapy with duration as tolerated, and that the accumulated ambulation score is used until an independent ambulatory status has been reached. And So related to the more intensive early mobilization or training, this study actually provided 3 times daily physiotherapy during the first post-operative week. And they had a definition on physical readiness for discharge with independence in bed and chair transfer, walking with a gait aid, and negotiation stairs if required. And they found that the intensive group actually reached this discharge criteria a median of 11 days earlier than the usual care group. So very promising results from this study. Just final slide. An easily way of exercising these patients is with providing strength training with weight cuffs, and it has proven feasible and also with some effectiveness when started already in the acute care setting. But you can see more about that on the links provided here. So many thanks for your attention. It's a great pleasure and looking forward to the discussion later on.
Thank you for the Professor Christensen, the wonderful talk about the mobilization throughout the rehab process. Its especially effect on the functional discharge. Now we have a lot of questions that will be discussed in the after the all presentations. I'm going to introduce the third the talk, Emma Sutton, about the prevention readmission after hip fracture. Please.
Hello, my name is Dr. Emma Sutton. Thank you for inviting me to speak today at this Asia Pacific meeting. I'm an orthopaedic physiotherapist and I've worked for the last 20 years in orthopaedics in acute NHS elective and trauma surgery and in community hospitals and private practice in the UK and in New Zealand. Since 2014, I've divided my work between clinical and academic, and my academic interest is in quality improvement interventions in surgery. In my clinical lectureship, I looked at how quality improvement could be used to reduce avoidable readmission after hip fracture, and the paper I published on this is what I'll be presenting today. This work on identifying evidence-based practices that can reduce readmission was published this year in Injury with Professor Rebecca Carney from Warwick University. The paper is called What Works? Interventions to Reduce Readmission After Hip Fracture. So why is readmission after hip fracture so important? More than 66,000 people fracture their hip in the UK every year. They have a mean age of 81 and 30% of them live in a care home. The number of people who are readmitted every year is rising, which you can see in this graph. The percentage increase in readmission is small. In 2013, 12.7% of hip fracture patients were readmitted, and in 2019, 14.1% of hip fracture patients were readmitted. But even though these numbers aren't large, the problem of avoidable readmission remains stubbornly persistent. There are approximately 7,700 readmissions a year, which equates to about 5 people per NHS trust. It's also important to show you this slide. This shows the number of readmissions to be much flatter. As I said, the percentage increase year on year is quite small, but this also shows the total number of hip fractures every year. And apart from a slight rise in 2020, these have also remained relatively steady. So we have this problem that what you see on the surface with readmissions is that really capturing what is actually happening underneath. So this is the question that I have in my mind of where is the real data? What is the real data for readmission? And this is the issue that capturing readmission or defining readmission might be quite hard. So what really counts as a readmission? Is readmission from a step-down hospital run by the same trust the same as a readmission from home? The discharge of patients varies hugely within infrastructure of local health networks as well. So some networks have rehab hospitals, some have community hospitals, some just discharge to home with a supported package, and some have a combination of all three depending on the postcode. And then there's this question of how accurate is the data. So does coding practices vary between hospitals? But despite problems in measurement, we know that hip fracture patients are readmitted, and we know that readmission is a big problem. Readmission readmitted patients are more likely to be discharged into a care setting rather than their own homes, and they're 3 times more likely to die during their readmission. Readmission is also very expensive, so we know that at an average cost per bed day of £222, hip fracture readmission costs more than £14.5 million a year for this group of 7,700 patients. So the data supports a clinical need to reduce readmission. What are the main reasons for readmission? Work from Kt Shinhan shows that between 17 and 38% of readmissions are avoidable, and the most common avoidable reasons for readmission are listed here. So we've got things like constipation, C. diff, pressure ulcers, etc. The grey table that you can see is from a paper by Anderson, and this categorises the types of error that might commonly lead to avoidable readmission. So, for example, diagnostic error, medication error, or just simply an error in judgment. All non-operative management errors combined were more frequent than errors in surgical technique. And we know that some risk factors like age, gender, and type of fracture won't be malleable. So we know that males with femoral neck fractures are more likely to be readmitted than females with subtrochanteric fractures, for example. But if we can try to target these areas that are malleable, so where errors are happening that could perhaps be avoided, then maybe we could start to change things. So this slide shows the work that I did with this review of systematic reviews. So I searched for systematic reviews on readmissions of older people that included populations of hip fracture patients. So although each systematic review that I included was not exclusively on populations of only hip fracture patients, there was always hip fracture patients included within each systematic review. I excluded 15 reviews because the included studies had a median age of lower than 60. So that's important to say that I only targeted reviews that focused on older populations. The Prisma diagram shows the process of reducing 915 titles and abstracts down to an inclusion of 19 papers. Of those 19 papers, 156 were randomised and non-randomised trials, and there were 33 studies of other designs. The studies were published in 18 different countries between 2007 and 2020. This slide shows the results, and I've presented this in a traffic light system of 7 interventions that can reduce readmission for populations of older people, where a proportion of the included papers looked at hip fracture. So the top 3 shown in green are beyond doubt able to have a significant effect on readmission. So these are individualised discharge planning, self-care and regional anaesthetic. So the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence guidelines for hip fracture regards discharge planning and self-care as a central part of hip fracture patients' rehab. NHS England encourages all discharges to include a discharge plan that's tailored to the individual, transfer of this discharge plan to primary care, a single coordinator to secure a timely discharge, and monitoring of the adherence to this discharge plan. NICE also recommends that patients are offered a choice between spinal and general anaesthesia, and our review showed that self-care component must include, well, it should include at least 5 unique components to reduce readmission to a greater degree. We also found that when interventions were implemented by teams, which included patients and their families, then they were more likely to be able to reduce readmission. Of the 76 studies included on discharge planning, 7 of them were on hip fracture patients. Of the 42 studies on self-care, 1 was on hip fracture, and of the 3 studies in the systematic review, three studies on anaesthetic were hip fracture populations. Now, the other interventions on this list, which are amber, show a moderate ability to affect readmission because they had mixed results. So using the example of oral nutritional supplements, we can see that the review by Stratton shows a significant effect on readmission. but a review by Remuson shows a non-significant effect on readmission. The paper by Avenel, there included studies. One of them showed that vitamin D3 does significantly affect readmission, whereas the other study included by Avenel shows that a protein-enriched diet shows a non-significant effect or trend towards reducing readmission. It was beyond doubt that these two interventions shown in red do not affect readmission after hip fracture. So that's enhanced recovery after surgery and comprehensive geriatric assessment. We also identified 39 systematic reviews which describe interventions to reduce readmission in a more general elderly population. So if you look at the column on the right here, you can see that there were no hip fracture studies at all in any of these systematic reviews. But I've raised it here because it's important not to discount them. So it could be useful for service providers, commissioners and researchers to consider these interventions before designing an implementation programme to solve the problem of readmission after hip fracture. So for example, the prevalence of heart failure is 27% in the hip fracture population, and these two systematic reviews have shown that telephone support for heart failure patients is very effective at reducing readmission. So what now? I certainly don't want to ignore this problem of avoidable readmission. We know that readmission is expensive. It costs £14.5 million a year, and for hip fracture patients, and it also has a significant effect on people's lives. So they're 3 times more likely to die during their readmission, and they're more likely to be discharged into a setting that isn't their own home. Now we know that there is already a major quality improvement project running at national scale, and that's this green web page that you can see here, the National Hip Fracture Database. And this already involves a series of interventions like geriatrician review, management of defined timeframes for surgery, so benchmarking. So it's seeking to try to optimise care for this patient group. And there's also this poster you can see in pink and green here, which is the HipQuip study run by Professor Mike Reed in Northumbria, which has also involved a series of connected interventions which have had impact on outcomes like mortality. Now, they didn't measure readmission, but it's possible that you could argue that some of their data could be rerun to evaluate the effect on readmission, but that's yet to happen. So my question then is, should we think that this standard that we're walking past is not acceptable, to accept this standard of a readmission rate that is continuing to rise year on year? Should we do something else about this readmission rate? Should we be thinking about designing very targeted improvement projects, perhaps across multiple sites, that target this very specific problem of readmission, using the examples that we've shown here that are known to significantly impact this outcome? Or should we be looking at using some kind of Delphi methodology to form a consensus on what exactly a package of interventions should look like that are able to impact readmission more heartily, as well as all of those other outcomes that are important? And should we think about how this future project should run? Which populations of hip fracture patients should we target? Should a bundle of interventions to prevent readmission only be targeted at patients who are most at risk of readmission? So this is a really interesting paper by Steventon, who shows that there are 94 predictive models available to estimate readmission risk, but they very nicely explain that it is not always easy to use these predictive models, and sometimes they're not always used appropriately, and maybe there's an argument there for targeting the entire hip fracture population with a blanket intervention across the whole group. But if the readmission rate could be reduced by just 20% over the next 5 years, this is what the graph I showed you in the beginning could begin to look like, with these orange bars going down and down. And wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice for patients and their families? And wouldn't that be nice for the NHS as well? So I'll just leave you with that thought, and thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you for the wonderful talk about the reduction of the readmissions. I'm very impressed the strategy integrated program to reduce the readmission. So we are going to the final talk. So final talk, Professor Antonio Allen Magandut, but the topic is enhanced recovery after hip fracture surgery. Let's have a final talk.
Good day, everyone. Thank you very much to the organizers and the board members of the Fragility Fracture Network for inviting me to speak on this third virtual pocket meeting on the topic of enhanced recovery after fragility fracture surgery, or in other words, what is the role of the anesthesiologist in improving outcomes in these kinds of surgeries. My name is Dr. Antonio Mangubat. I'm from the Department of Anesthesiology of the University of the Philippines, Philippine General Hospital. ERA stands for Enhanced Recovery After Surgery, and this was developed by the Danish surgeon Kt in the 1990s. And it is a series of evidence-based interventions packaged in a multidisciplinary care pathway. The theory of Kt being that if you reduce the size of surgery, if you improve patient safety, if you improve patient satisfaction, this will lead to better outcomes. And what are these outcomes that he thought of? Length of stay, reduction of post-operative complications, and a faster recovery and rehabilitation times for the patients. Initially, the ERAS was geared towards general surgery and colorectal surgery, but now it has expanded to include all branches of surgery, even in fields as diverse as otorhinolaryngology, neurosurgery, and of course our favorite, orthopedic surgery. So in the year 2020, the ERA Society came out with a consensus statement for the development or the application of ERAs in patients undergoing total hip replacement and total knee replacement surgery. So for us in the Fragility Fracture Network who care for these patients, this is a godsend because now we have a clear-cut pathway in terms of how we manage these patients. And we all know this is a special patient population because most of the patients with hip fractures or total hip replacement are actually geriatric patients. And usually they fall, and then when they fall, they fracture their hip and need to be operated on urgently. So there is a special set of things we have to watch out for in this patient population. And the areas will really benefit the geriatric age group. And why is this? Because most of these patients have a multitude of comorbid conditions. So most of them will have long-standing hypertension, diabetes, and cardiac disease. And a reduction in surgical stress will be of great benefit to these patients. Post-operatively, they may have post-operative cognitive dysfunction and or delirium, and also post-operative pain. And these are things that we should control because these will delay recovery and lead to worse outcomes if uncontrolled. Now, one of the best benefits of an ERAS protocol is decreased hospital length of stay. Decreasing the length of stay in a hospital will reduce the economic cost of these patients, okay? And in countries like the Philippines, where there is no universal healthcare system, most of the patients pay for their own surgeries out of pocket, or they actually borrow money from their relatives. That's very, very common with very, very little government subsidy. So anything that will decrease the length of stay and reduce operating costs, okay, will be of great benefit to these patients. And of course, application of an ERAS protocol and ERAS pathway will lead to early rehabilitation. And we all know, as we've been talking for the past hour or so, how beneficial this is for our patients. Now, based on these guidelines, the Philippine General Hospital has come up with its own ERAS protocol in this kind of surgeries. And if you see this protocol, the multiple care teams, anesthesia, surgery, nursing, rehab, and patient, each have different roles to play during each stage of the operation. So days before the patient is admitted, this is what the anesthesiologist will do, this is what the surgeon will do. in the pre-op period, and so forth and so on, all the way up to the post-operative period. So we follow these ERAS guidelines so that we again improve outcomes. I keep on stressing improvement of outcomes because that's what we'll be talking about in a short while. So what is the role specifically of the anesthesiologist in order to improve outcomes? So number one is preoperative optimization. As I have mentioned previously, many of these patients have long-standing comorbid conditions, and in concert with an internal medicine or a geriatrician, we optimize their clinical status so that they can be operated on urgently, ideally within 24 to 48 hours. A standard anesthetic protocol in the Philippine General Hospital, we usually use spinal anesthesia with a peripheral nerve block for post-operative pain, or if there are any contraindications to neuraxial anesthesia, we usually give general anesthesia plus the peripheral nerve block, again for post-operative pain. We do not give intrathecal or spinal opioids, and if we are going to insert an epidural anesthesia, we do not give epidural opioids, and we remove the epidural catheter immediately post-operatively so that the patient can ambulate, because all of these things that are attached to the patient will actually be a hindrance for them to mobilize on the first post-operative day. Many patients will have post-operative nausea and vomiting, so 2 or 3 agents as needed will be given to prevent post-operative nausea and vomiting. Tranexamic acid, usually a 1 gram loading dose, is also administered in order to prevent or decrease the use of blood transfusion during surgery. Multimodal opioid-sparing anesthesia and post-operative analgesia is used. So our oral pain medication, so the patient is awake or post-operatively, would include paracetamol, NSAIDs, or COX-2 inhibitors, depending on the kidney function of the patient. During operation, we do not allow our patients to become hypothermic, and we maintain their fluid balance. So we do not want an overhydrated or underhydrated patient. Usually, we insert a Foley catheter, but we remove this at the end of the operation, okay, so that patient again will be able to mobilize immediately post-operative. And we institute strategies to prevent the development of post-operative cognitive dysfunction. And these strategies would include the prevention of hypothermia, the prevention of hypotension, the avoidance of the anticholinergic agents, the use of benzodiazepines in patients who are already on benzodiazepines or helpings. So all of these things will ideally lead to a better outcome. And one of the outcome measures that we measure in PGH is actually immediate post-operative mobilization. So the PGH experience for early post-operative mobilization is here. So we asked a group of orthopedic surgery residents and rehabilitation medicine residents, what is their experience in terms of day one post-operative mobilization? And post-operative mobilization means that the patient is able to move their legs passively or sit down on the bed or dangle their feet on the side of the bed. And the results of this survey showed that 38% of the residents who were asked, observed that 3/4 of their patients would actually be moving, as I described, on the first post-operative day. And in fact, if you include the other 35.3% of respondents, you'd see that around 60% of respondents say that more than half of patients will actually be moving already on the first post-operative day. So that is a very good news. We see that our interventions allow the patient to be fully awake and he regains his motor and sensory function enough in order to be able to mobilize. Now, how about post-operative day one ambulation? Now, the result of the survey here, it's not as much as the mobilization, but you can see 8.8% of respondents said that more than 3/4 of their patients were already walking or ambulating with the aid of walker on the first post-operative day. And 20.6% of respondents said that more than half of the patients would actually be walking already on the first post-operative day. So this is also very good to hear. Okay? But obviously, you can see that we need better numbers in terms of day one ambulation. Okay? And what are the factors that will actually prevent them from moving or ambulating? And quite distressing to see that pain, in all respondents, pain was the primary consideration of why the patients were not ambulating post-operative. So that actually hits straight to our hearts as anesthesiologists, and obviously leads us to see that we need to improve our pain control post-operatively so these patients can move. Having said that, most of the patients said also that they know that even though it's painful, they still try to move because they know that it benefits them to actually mobilize and not be bedridden right after the operation. Other factors that will cause a delay in post-operative mobilization, severe weakness, lack of supervision, okay, and then others, very, very minor, drowsiness from anesthesia. So again, that's something for us to review. Patient's anxiety, prior deconditioning status of the patient due to long-standing injury, fear of moving despite help or assistance, the presence of peripheral lines, Foley catheters, epidural catheters, femoral catheters will also prevent them from mobilizing on the first post-operative day, and of course, the apprehension of the patient and the watcher. So the results of this and really will show us in actual practice what we need to improve on, even though we have an ERAS protocol already, what we need to improve on in order to actually have better outcomes for these patients. So in summary, I've talked about our ERAS experience and in PGH and its effect on post-operative mobilization of patients on the first day after the operation. So thank you very much, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you to all our speakers. Dr. Jae Young, we saw that our participants are all very much engaged and very interested.
Yeah, so there are a lot of questions right now. So we will open the Q&A session. So how much time we will use from now on?
I think we are given just 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Now it's already 4:22, so probably another 8 minutes because we have to start the second part by 4:30. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we divided the issue as 2 points. So first, the definition of the early mobilization, and then how to implement this mobilization in our clinical setting internationally. So we have several questions related to the definition of early mobilization. So from the audience, actually the mobilization can be defined 1 day and 1 day after surgery. But the question is what the level of the mobilization could be the early mobilization. For example, sitting at the edge of the bed with legs just dangling, it could be early mobilization, or without weight bearing, it could be also early mobilization. So please give us answer from Kt or the Morten Christensen, please.
I'm happy to take this. I guess from the audit's perspective, it's sitting or standing out of bed, which is quite broad and could be interpreted in different ways. I think we can work from the optimal. The ideal would be that we would support someone to sit at the edge of the bed, to stand up and to walk, but that's not going to be achieved by everybody. So we do whatever that patient is able to do. So I think, that might be moving somebody to the edge of the bed. I think if you can try and get their feet supported on the floor rather than having their feet dangling, it's a little bit more engaged for them. And attempting a stand with the support of 2 and perhaps a frame as well. But sitting at the edge of the bed and feet being supported is a great achievement for somebody if they have a very low baseline in terms of functional ability. If it's looking like somebody is not going to be able to do that at all, then I personally think that it's okay to think then about hoist transferring somebody out to sit in the chair. You know, getting somebody out and getting them engaged, sitting in a chair to have their meals, can be really beneficial in terms of post-operative complications such as delirium. But the ideal and what we're striving towards is getting somebody into sitting and then supported into standing and then walking. So you start with that goal and work backwards depending on what the patient is able to achieve.
Thank you for excellent question, excellent answer. So what do you think of the Morten? Please.
I think I completely agree with Katie. This is how it should be done, just to try and engage these patients as much as possible. And of course, taking into consideration their medical and surgical status related to, are they allowed weight bearing as tolerated, or do they have some restrictions? But still, if they do have that, just getting seated in a chair is much better than lying in a bed. So that would be the priority. And the definition that is being used in Denmark for being mobilized is getting patients to standing or seated in a chair beside the bed as a minimum. And I think that's similar in the UK database. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Morten. So really getting out of bed as early as possible is the key for early discharge, isn't it? Yeah, thank you. There's another question here. Dr. Jaya, I'll give it to Dr. Morten. Is there any evidence or research that states that correlation between hip fracture patients' CAS score of 9 points or greater and their pre-morbid level function or endurance? Is there any correlation?
Yeah, I think there's a strong correlation. If we look at the pre-fracture level, this is one of the functional level, and no matter if you use the new mobility score or other scores evaluating function before fracturing, in the Danish setting, we also use the CAS score, and there's about 20% of patients, they are not independent in these basic activities, and most of them are patients admitted from nursing homes. So the majority of patients from their own home, they are independent in these activities before fracturing their hip. And we know that patients from nursing homes, they experience a greater risk of mortality related to their general health status. So pretty strong association also related to these very basic activities. Thank you.
So actually the early mobilization is definitely good. That have a lot of the evidence, but sometimes it's quite limited the patient conditions. For example, the patient who have the dementia and delirious condition, especially the poor functions. The question is from Hidenori Arai from Japan. The question is how we can mobilize those poor condition and dementia patients only after surgery. So Morten or the Katie?
I think it's the million-dollar question, isn't it, for a lot of people. You know, those with advanced dementia and really poor prefracture function can be a challenge. I think we have to look at, I suppose, care process factors and make sure that they're not the reason for a barrier. So, for example, early mobilization can be done by anybody, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a physiotherapist. If somebody is deemed medically stable, then that shouldn't be a barrier to getting them up. Not having a second set of hands is an organizational barrier that we can look to overcome as well, because likely you will need at least 2 people to support them if you're going to try and complete early mobilization. Other things such as factors associated with delirium, adequate pain control, making sure that none of those are going to be barriers for this patient so that you're giving yourself the best chance to achieve it. And then getting a good background, seeing what this person was able to do beforehand, be it at home or in their care home, because that's what you're trying to achieve. And if they were able to get out of their bed with a cyst of 2 and a frame, then that's your target. And it might be quite difficult to achieve that following hip fracture surgery. So maybe you're looking at transferring into chair at bedside. using a hoist. So for your first go, seeing how they tolerate sitting, and then kind of progressing from there to get them into standing by maybe going back to them a little bit later in the day. So there isn't an answer, and it can be incredibly difficult. But I guess looking at why somebody isn't getting out of bed, and is it truly because of their ability, or is it because of staffing issues? Is it because they may be in pain? Is it because they're presenting with delirium and that's not being well managed? And removing that, and then seeing if you're still struggling. And in some cases, it just won't be achieved, and there's not a lot we can do about that, but making sure that we've tried our best to remove all the barriers and then really giving that person the opportunity to do that. The other thing that I would say from our patient and care representatives is that sometimes people do a lot better when they have got a family member there, a familiar face to support them. That's obviously incredibly difficult during COVID, but post-COVID, because we do look to see a post-COVID world, that may be engaging a familiar face, be it a family member or somebody from a care home, to see if that they can help with trying to support that person to get out of bed.
Thank you. So another concern is the pain issue after the hip fracture. So there are several questions related to pain issues. So I think please, Antonio, so do you have any specific intervention to reduce the pain management?
Thank you very much for your question. So for pain control at the emergency room, these patients are actually given already a block by our regional anesthesia department of our institution. So we give them either a fascia iliaca block or a PENG block, a pericapsular nerve group block, okay, so that pre-operatively pain is well controlled. And then post-operatively, we also give them a PENG block. I think the pericapsular nerve group block would be the most ideal because it has no sensory, and purely sensory and no motor involvement. So this will promote early rehabilitation. And this block combined with IV dexamethasone has actually been shown to reduce the incidence of post-operative cognitive dysfunction and also provide analgesia for up to 24 hours post-operatively. So this is what we use in our institution so that pain control, but not all patients get it. I think that's why in the study that I showed or in the survey that I showed, it's still a learning process and it still has to roll out in all departments and in all patients. So that's something you have to work on.
Okay, so
thank you.
Yeah.
Professor Day, maybe one last question, there is a question here about pre-rehabilitation prior to the orthopedic surgery. May I ask our speakers and comment about this, if there is any role of pre-rehabilitation prior to surgery that will affect outcome? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it depends on the situation in different countries, because in Denmark, for example, patients undergo surgery within the day after or at the latest 2 days after. So there's not really a reason for doing pre-rehabilitation. But I know in other parts of the world, patients wait for getting surgery. And then specific bed exercises to avoid further loss of muscle strength and thrombosis, etc. Probably is important, but it's not that well studied because, but I think it has a role in parts of the world where patients wait several days for having surgery. It's good question and quite important, I think, but. From the Danish perspective, it's not something that's offered to patients because the primary focus is getting patients to the theatre and undergo surgery as soon as possible after being admitted.
Thank you very much, Professor Morten. Maybe one comment from Dr. Emma, probably, from her point of view. Thank you.
Oh, hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yes, thank you.
Great. I was just going to comment because I've actually just finished writing a systematic review of systematic reviews on prehab, It's not actually about hip fracture though, it's about hip and knee replacement surgery, and it's due to be submitted for publication soon. So I thought I'd point that out, that the findings from that show that prehabilitation is effective in reducing length of stay and improving functional outcomes when it's combined when 3 or more elements are combined. So exercise, education, dietary support.
Thank you very much, Professor Emma. And Dr. Jaya, I think we have reached our limit. May we ask our speakers to also answer the questions in the chat box. In the interest of time, we have to move on to our next, the second part of our activity. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Jaya. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a very fruitful session. Thank you all.
Thank you to all our keynote speakers, for a very productive and interesting session. I think the number of questions really reflects the interest that our participants showed to this particular session. But due to the interest of time, we have to move on to the second part of our pocket meeting. Now, at this point, I would like to introduce our chairs and moderators, who are both part of the FFN Philippines board. The first is the head of the spine section and training officer of the Spine Fellowship Program of the Department of Orthopedics in Chonghua Hospital in Cebu, Dr. Jeff Arbatin. And the second is a geriatrician, and he's a clinical associate professor of the Department of Medicine at the University of the Philippines, Philippine General Hospital, and also a board member of the Philippine College of Geriatric Medicine, Dr. Mark Evans Abad. So Mark and Jeff, okay.
Thank you, Dr. Tabu. So for the next part of the program, we'll have a 5-minute presentation by each speaker from a specific Asia-Pacific country. The goal of this session would be to highlight what are the future initiatives to improve the fracture recovery in the geriatric population. The COVID-19 pandemic has increased our inequities, and for the past 1 year and 8 months, we are keen on how each country is able to surpass or at least enhance the secondary fracture prevention. So I suggest for the next reactors to please turn on your video. We will only be giving 5 minutes, and I will just raise my hand if your time is up. So for the first speaker, we have Dr. Ronald M.Y. Wong. He's an orthopedic surgeon and assistant professor of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, Prince of Wales Hospital in Hong Kong, China. Go ahead, Professor Wong.
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction. Just share my screen. And so, first of all, I'd like to thank the FFN for the opportunity to share my experiences in Hong Kong. So I'm Dr. Ronald Wong, a clinical assistant prof from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So I'm an orthopedic surgeon, and a lot of day in, day out cases are fragility fracture patients for me. And as a trauma surgeon, besides from performing operations, I also believe that preventing the second one is also very important. And today I'd just like to share my experiences. Now, this is a familiar X-ray to all of us, a cemented hemiarthroplasty for neck and femur fractures. We all know that it's for pain relief and improvement of mobility, but what after surgery? Now, published studies have highlighted the key pitfalls in the management in Hong Kong in the past, and they're actually the lack of the fracture liaison services, low prescription rates for osteoporosis, inadequate referral for rehab, low follow-up attendance, and pre-op geriatric co-care. We have more than 6,000 hip fractures every year in Hong Kong, and in order to improve the situation, we established guidelines in Hong Kong for the promotion and establishment of fracture liaison services in all hospitals to coordinate the management of our hip fracture patients. We recently published this article in the Hong Kong Medical Journal as a reference and standard for the management of fragility fractures. And as a result, now all our hip fracture patients at our unit receive geriatric co-care, and most hospitals have adopted fracture liaison services together with a nurse coordinator. We also published an article in Archives of Osteoporosis regarding the epidemiology of fragility fractures here, which highlights the concept of imminent fractures in Hong Kong. And consistent with literature, we found that more than 50% of secondary fractures actually occur during this period. Therefore, this window of opportunity is also the most effective in the prevention of a secondary fragility fracture. We recommended that all clinicians and allied healthcare professionals should be alert on this here. And based on this, our fracture liaison services actually target this 2-year period in particular. Now, to treat bone health, the Hong Kong guidelines are currently getting updated, but very similar to the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists guidelines and IOF guidelines, we stratify patients based on the risk and treat accordingly. Besides on bone health, our published systematic review had also shown that sarcopenia can actually occur in up to 95% in males and 68% in females with fragility fractures. In fact, a local study performed in Hong Kong also showed that for our hip fractures, around 70% of patients actually have a sarcopenia. And based on this, this reinforces that our fracture services here should also focus on muscle health. So for our patients, we advise and refer them to do exercises, and our dietitian also deals with the nutrition after surgery. So for the management and mind unit, each fracture patient is thoroughly evaluated, and in patients, we have an ortho-geriatrician for co-care. The patient is also referred to the dietitian and physiotherapist for rehab. Now, as a recent fragility fracture is considered a very high risk, preferably a bone-forming agent is used, but in a public setting, the patient is covered only if they have history of 2 or more fragility fractures and a very low T-score. So in general, IV zoledronic acid or denosumab is used. The DEXA scan is offered for all our hip fracture patients, and upon prescribing the drug, the patient is monitored with DEXA every 2 years. And as for the target to treat, the treatment target would be at least more than -2 and preferably to -1.5. And if the T-score was more than -2.5 to begin with, I'd go for at least 1.0 T-score unit improvement. And once target is reached, if the patient started off with an anabolic drug, sequential therapy would be offered. And if the patient have reached the target with bisphosphonates, they'd go for a drug holiday. And for those that have reached treatment target with denosumab, they would continue or switch to a bisphosphonate. As for our current goals and objectives, we're currently in a process of setting up FFN Hong Kong SOL here and going through the paperwork, and hopefully it will go smoothly. Our primary aim is to try to align all hospitals in Hong Kong for the best multidisciplinary practice and system of care by following the 4 pillars of global FFN, and to work closely with FFN China and also learning from other national FFNs. With that, I'd like to thank the audience, and I hope my sharing was meaningful.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Excellent talk. I think the take-home message would be the geriatric co-management and the identification of sarcopenia as a significant problem and a specific treatment algorithm. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Move on to our second speaker, Dr. Rajesh Malhotra. Dr. Rajesh Malhotra is an orthopedic surgeon. He is a professor and head of the Department of Orthopedics at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi, and also the past president of the Indian Orthopedic Association. Go ahead, Professor Malhotra.
Hello, thank you for this opportunity, and this is a pleasure to be speaking on this forum. And this is the layout of my talk, and this is a short background of FFN India. We started in 2017, and the place where I worked was the birthplace of FFN India, and we are on those resting on those 3 pillars: patient care, training, and research. And our goals are in sync with the FFN Global. So let's talk about the hip fracture. This is the projected incidence of hip fractures in India. And I'm just going to take you through a case scenario of a patient at my center. So 4 o'clock in the evening, this lady sustains a fracture. At 8 o'clock, her son brings her because he thinks there's something is wrong with the mom. She's triaged yellow and diagnosed to have a hip fracture. And then, the X-ray revealed the intertrochanteric fracture, and she had been ambulatory without the use of any assistive devices prior to the injury, lives with her children, had osteoarthritis knee, and has hypertension for which she doesn't take treatment properly, takes only when she feels the blood pressure is high. So finally, she's admitted at 1:45 p.m. next day, and a skin foam traction is applied, facial Lanka block is given. At 7 o'clock in the evening next day, she's operated and then she's mobilized. She attends the Fragility fracture clinic, the sutures are removed, and then she has been put on treatment based on her investigation. She gets a zoledronic acid because she has a high risk for a fracture. Our data is, do we match the expectation? We published this paper in Archives of Osteoporosis, and we found that 68% of the delay was after the admission to the hospital, and only 43% patients at our tertiary care center, the best university hospital in the country, had surgery within 48 hours. And the reasons for delay were these, that most of the times the patients were medically unfit. The uncommon causes were delay in reaching hospital, or the delay in the previous hospital, or delay in seeking attention, or difficulty in transport. And 9 out of 10 patients had an abnormal test report, which led to a delay. Anemia and hyponatremia were the most common, and 2 out of 5 had a newly diagnosed comorbidity, and most common being hypertension and chronic lung disease. And the mortality was most commonly due to sepsis and pneumonia, and half of the patients died at home. And it was mentioned that that can confound our data. So the priority areas are increased time to surgery has to be addressed, newly diagnosed illnesses have to be handled, and the mortality rates have to be realistic because many of the patients die at home. So these are the challenges: the funding and finances, infrastructure, and penetrating the barriers of awareness, large population, affordability, and access to care. We don't have a registry, so we are unable to track the patient, which hinders the research and proper patient follow-up. We have a fragility fracture clinic at our center, which has a multidisciplinary approach. We have state-of-the-art gait lab. We have the something called Sati, which means companion, and which is basically Save the Hip initiative, and where we put the patient through fall prevention program. But then this is about the tertiary care hospital in the country. We have 2 Indias. So the other one, which is the majority, is 71%, which is in the rural area. And there's a problem of lack of caregivers, overloaded hospitals, lack of access. Many times patients have to travel close to 100 kilometers to get access to the medical care. There are lack of resources, there are quacks, there's poverty, and the interdisciplinary coordination may be a problem. And above all, the patients most of the times pay out of pocket, which becomes a problem. And even in COVID, it has been found that a large majority of population has been pushed below the poverty line. And the same thing has been known about the hip fracture also. So we need to act at the pre-hospital, in-hospital, and rehab level, and we need care pathways for each of these. So challenges at pre-hospital are a tendency to delay or ignore the problem, traditional bone setters, unqualified practitioners, and lack of infrastructure. And on your right, you find the actions which are required. So we have to get the patient to the hospital. The in-hospital challenges are overcrowding of the public hospital. They cannot afford surgery, or they are scared of surgery, or surgery is delayed. And that we need to provide the earliest appropriate care. The follow-up challenges are the rehab is neglected, there's a poor follow-up, and the patient depend on caregiver. And the goal is not just to fix the fracture, but to bring the patient back to the normal and rehab. So we are still in the juvenile phase in India. It is limited only to the few urban centers, and then we often end up neglecting the vertebral and distal and radius fractures, which can be the harbingers of the hip fractures later on. So those are the problems which we face, and I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Malhotra. Thank you for highlighting the disparity between developing countries and our situation right now. And I think by highlighting the urban and rural inequities, I think the only way of addressing that would be to ask the help of different subspecialties. And congratulations on that effort. For our third speaker, we have Dr. Kyung Hoon Min. He's a rehabilitation physician and associate professor of the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine at the CHA Bundang Medical Center, CHA University School of Medicine, Seongnam, Korea. Go ahead, Professor Min.
Good afternoon. My name is Kyung Hoon Min, and I'm a pediatrist. And I would like to talk about weight bearing and our country's national pilot education program for successful rehabilitation after hip fracture surgeries. My first topic is weight bearing. mobilization can be started only after weight bearing is allowed, and that can be different by surgical approaches. I think there are many non-surgeons, including me, here, so this topic may be interesting. Hip fractures can be classified into femoral neck, intertrochanteric, subtrochanteric fractures. All the patients with displaced femoral neck fractures are usually treated with hemiarthroplasty because of the less risk of dislocation and side effects. This picture shows the displaced femoral neck fracture. And to fix the femoral stem of the prosthesis, cement can be used or not. Red line refers to cemented group and blue line, uncemented group. In all the patients treated with hip replacement, cemented group showed the lower incidence of prosthesis revision, loosening, and periprosthetic fractures. So the general policy in patients treated with hemiarthroplasty, if the components were cemented, only weight bearing is allowed even at the day of surgery. The next topic is our national pilot education program to facilitate only mobilization and community care in our country. The clinical practice guideline developed by APTA this year recommends extended exercise beyond 8 to 16 years after fracture, as well as only mobilization. Our country's guideline also recommends home-based rehabilitation during recovery and maintenance phases. As you may know, all Korean people are covered by National Health Insurance System. The government organization responsible for healthcare has operated the education program for patients with hip, knee, ankle surgeries. In that program, after obtaining patients' agreements, they are educated about how to exercise, how to use gait aids, and how to deal with post-operative. After discharge, the nurses of rehabilitation team monitoring their adherences for their educated program. Over the country, 66 hospitals are participating in the program. Hospitals should admit these documents about patient information and the educated content. The service providers get paid by their national government. So to summarize, in patients with cemented hemiarthroplasty, immediate weight bearing is allowed. And in our country, since last year, the pilot education program for successful rehabilitation has been conducted for patients with low extremity surgeries. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Min. I think you bring a very important point that orthopedic surgeons and rehab doctors should continue to communicate before and after surgery so as to provide the adequate care for our patients. I'd like to highlight the fact that you have a very successful 8 to 16 weeks extended home PT program, and I commend you on that. For the fourth speaker, I'd like to call on Dr. Abdul Rahman bin Abhamid. Dr. Abdul is a geriatric rehabilitation specialist and the head of the Department of Rehab Medicine in the Hospital Sultana Bahia, Malaysia. Go ahead, Professor Hamid.
Assalamualaikum and good morning. I'm Dr. Abdul Rahman from Hospital Rehabilitation Cheras. So thank you for this opportunity in this Fragility Network Malaysia podcast presentation. So I will talk about post-hip fracture rehabilitation currently. So the old age dependency ratio is increasing. It is much more in Asian countries, and then Malaysia is expected to be the same as well. So there is many types of hip fracture which is surgically reconstructed and not surgically reconstructed. So this is some views of CT reconstruction, X-rays, and so on. These individuals were older, multi-morbid, mostly is female, and were already at risk of falls and also fractures. In Malaysia, the average age range from 74 to 79 years old. Up to 75% were female, and 77% had at least one comorbid illness, and 26% were considered multimorbid. Intervention given by rehabilitation team and also the geriatrician and also the orthopedic surgeon is a multidisciplinary approach where multidisciplinary problem requires multidisciplinary dimension treatment. Team that trusts is a team which is triumph. That is the concept that we use here. It is designed to design, plan, build and operate a rehabilitation pathway for those patients with post-hip fracture. So just consider yourself as a part of the orchestra team. Everybody is very necessary to be there. If not, the sound will be not nice to be heard. So in order to do some rehabilitation, we need to improve in terms of education and also the awareness of the patient which is being involved. Usually in rehabilitation, we use this ICF model of, let's say, hip fractures. There is some limitation in terms of function, such as pain, reduced range of motion. So sometimes we can give some pain medication, physiotherapy, aerobic training, and so on. In terms of activity limitation, we can give some gait training and also activity of daily living training. And in terms of participation limitation, we give vocational training and also social integration programs. Environmental factors such as barrier-free environment, social acceptance, and ergonomics. Also, we can improve. In terms of patients' personal factors, we can improve awareness of the education and also family involvement and also cognitive behavioral treatment. So this is to start with. Usually we start with some respiratory improvement such as chest expansion, effective cough technique, breathing exercise, and also ACBT, use of spirometry, and so on. Our focus will be then on mobilization, balance, and also ambulation, improving in terms of activity of daily living independency and return to supportive environment. We initiate some sit to stand early in the progress, whether it is phase 1, phase 2, and also phase 3. There is some physical deficit that we also try to correct, such as trunk control, head control, poor sitting balance or standing balance, where the problem could have because of reduced mobility, difficulty in sit and out of bed, difficulty in transfer to bed and wheelchair, and unable to or need assistance in ambulation. We rectify all those problems and try to improve. Also tackling some common musculoskeletal problems associated, such as osteoarthritis of the other sound legs and so on. We also sometimes resort to some adaptive equipment such as reacher to pick something up more easily, adaptive methods for complicated patients, putting the sleeve on the fractured leg first, use of long handle shoe horn to put on a shoe, button hooks, shower seat, dressing stick, minimize energy output, and also improve functions. Sometimes we also advise in terms of home modification, such as remove treatment slip and grab bar in toilet and railing to stairs, use of bright light at home, lower the bed, identify the bright colors. We notice that the patient can have some lower quality of life following hip fracture. 75% will present with difficulty with daily living, daily activities. Almost like 40% will have disability to walk independently, and about 25% will enter nursing home. This is some multidisciplinary model that we use to see our patient with. Some patients to improve in terms of daily aerobic activity, we encourage them to do some activity locks, such as this, which can progressively increase overweight, and pedometer lock to keep them healthier. Our country Ministry of Health is planning to develop a hip fracture clinical practice guideline, and the community will be having their meeting soon. One of our FFNM council members, including me, is also a member of the above committee, and FFNM National FLS Program Group for Malaysia is in progress. We also sometimes use some social media in health delivery, such as this posting in terms of the exercises and for prevention. Also emphasize in terms of a fragility fracture network in Malaysia. We create awareness and then we educate more people about fragility fracture in Malaysia. Okay, thank you. I represent Malaysia. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Hamid. 2 points. Number one, the use of technology. Almost everyone has a cell phone and we can track the amount of steps that we can take, although it's an estimate, but at least it gives us something to guide us. Having a weekly goal for our patient means that they're progressing or they're delaying, and then we should address these factors. And number two, the use of social media. I think Southeast Asian patients are more online compared to the other countries, and that's a way for us to educate our patients. I turn you over to my co-moderator, Dr. Mark Abat, to introduce the next 4 speakers.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for staying with us. Up next is Professor Tashfeen Ahmad, who is a consultant orthopedic surgeon and associate professor of the Department of Surgery, Aga Khan University, Pakistan. Please proceed, Professor Ahmad.
Yes, hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present in this FFN pocket meeting. So in Pakistan, we are working towards establishing a fragility fracture network across the country. I belong to a private university known as the Aga Khan University, located in our biggest city, Karachi. We have been the leading institution in terms of academics, research and education. I have no financial interest to declare. So really I'll talk about how this FFN activity started. A couple of us, Dr. Aisha Habib and me, met and at that time we decided that this is something that we really need to move forward in our country. So we came back and discussed with our people at our institution, and they agreed to work towards it. So we formed a multidisciplinary group comprising of people from chemical pathology, endocrinology, internal medicine. We do not have a geriatric service as yet, orthopedics and radiology agreement, and we hope to launch it soon. Is concerned,
Sorry, Professor Ahmad, you're breaking up.
So we have been discussing. Our university emphasizes a lot on research, and therefore we put the angle of research to our activities also. So this bone and mineral research group is Dr. Aisha, other members are present in that research group. So we have presented a few papers in different conferences. Now, as far as the local discussion, local collaborations are concerned, we have discussed with this star is showing our location, which is in Karachi, Pakistan, as the center of our activities, and then we have included other hospitals, and they have given us an in-principle agreement to work towards an FLS at their institutes. This includes a couple of private institutes as well as a couple of government institutes. We altogether probably take care of maybe around 50% of the hip fracture cases which are coming to the city of Karachi. So that's a good progress that we have. That's an in-principle agreement. And the other major cities, Lahore, Islamabad, Peshawar, and Quetta, also several institutes have agreed to move forward. So our next step, which we plan, is to have a meeting, our countrywide meeting on Zoom to discuss the way forward to establish a pathways for hip fracture care and a hip fracture database. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Ahmad, for that interesting talk. As we can see, you've emphasized the importance of having a multidisciplinary group, and you've mentioned having a network of institutions and partners for having a pathway for management of hip fractures. Again, thank you for that. Up next is Professor Shelian De La Vega, one of my mentors here in the Philippines. She is a geriatrician and a professor from the University of the Philippines in Manila, and the director of the Institute of Aging from the University of the Philippines, Manila, and the National Institutes of Health. Kindly proceed, Professor De La Vega.
Good afternoon, everyone, colleagues. Thank you, Dr. Abad. Let me share my slide, please. All right, I am giving the perspective of a geriatrician and a clinical epidemiologist. The experts in the actual fragility fracture network in the Philippines is Dr. Irwin Tabu and Dr. Abad, and so I will not specifically discuss those. So I'm going to talk about what is happening in the Philippine General Hospital, where I am a part of, and we do have a post-discharge evaluation clinic in the internal medicine department, geriatric clinic, and that is run by internal medicine, rehab physiatry, and orthopedics, and we have a nurse coordinator there. This is also where teaching and learning happens. We supervise our internal medicine and rehab medicine residents, our nurse student observers, and our student rotators. So we have geriatricians and physiatry consultants in that clinic. The family is always present with the patient, of course, and so they also receive patient education, family education. In the medical city where I am a consultant, we do have what we call the inpatient in-hospital fall prevention program, wherein we have a digitized screening fall risk assessment for outpatient, inpatient, child, and adult. And we have the ability to monitor the changes in their fall risk scores and look at what we can do eventually. So this is also an interdisciplinary endeavor with internal medicine, geriatrics, pediatrics, rehab, nursing, environmental safety officers, and emergency room team taking part in this. Let me talk to you about what we have been able to call in terms of clinical epidemiology. And this is a paper from the Fit for Frail program, which is really a combination of health risk assessment, geriatric assessment, as well as a health systems evaluation. So one of the policy briefs that came out from that research project is the need for we saw a 15% prevalence of frailty. So in that same study, it was found that those who were robust and pre-frail performed more physical activities. And as we know, those who are more physically active had the higher risk of falling. So that was a little bit of a, not so much of a surprise, but also in the health systems program of that research, we realized that there were training and program needs. There were training and program needs in terms of delirium and dementia, which, as we heard of earlier in the earlier lectures, are very important in good outcomes post-fracture surgery. So delirium, dementia, discharge planning, post-discharge planning, home visits, and the presence of home physical therapy, OT, and nutrition therapy, these were found to be our needs, lacking in that health systems review. Now, so our recommendations really center on the community. We have heard about prehab and a lot of the inpatient programs that are necessary for improving discharge outcomes. But I think, and we believe that really we need to strengthen primary and secondary care, secondary prevention of fractures included. So we do recommend fitness education, counseling, and group exercise programs with a emphasis on strength and balance exercises, improving access to osteoporosis screening in the community, and of course, comprehensive geriatric assessment and management in the community. We cannot force this as a service for inpatients. That's why we do not see a lot of good outcomes if we just concentrate on inpatient care. So we really are asking for our universal healthcare program to also include funding for home care. The home care by physicians, nurse, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and basic laboratory tests to improve outcomes in all health measures as well as post-fracture. So we heard about dementia as something that affects outcome, and we are working on a regional policy draft on dementia. And in the Philippines, we have been coming up with online and print IEC materials on caring for patients with dementia, with chronic comorbidities, caring for their carers, and how to create a dementia-friendly environment, again, in the hope of improving outcomes, not just, of course, for those with dementia alone, but those who have fractured and have dementia. So this is very important. So thank you very much. You may contact us through these numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor De La Vega, and very nice points on fall prevention, frailty, the geriatric syndromes, and geriatric support systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Up next is Professor Sarat Lekamwasam, who is a professor of medicine at the University of Ruhuna and is the head of the Population Health and Research Center in the University of Ruhuna, Sri Lanka. Please take it away, Professor.
I'm joining soon after my consultation, and so sorry, I'm still in the same attire. I had no time to go and change. I'm going to do a small summary of fragility fracture related work in Sri Lanka during the next, let's say, 5 minutes or so. Basically, I'm going to highlight on the recent research that Sri Lanka has published, and also the attempts to enhance the current care given to fragility fracture patients. So those are the two main items I'm going to speak on. During the last 2-3 years, we have managed to publish what is called the incidence of hip fractures in Sri Lanka based on the age categories. And also we are working on all the incidence of all hip fragility fractures in the country. So eventually we should have data on the incidence of the hip fracture and also data on the incidence of the all fragility fractures in Sri Lanka. Eventually we should have that. And also we managed to publish normative values of bone mineral density, trabecular bone score, and also two bone markers, PNIP and the CTX, from the age range of something like 40 years to 80 years. And we managed to find those figures. The mortality and the quality of life and the physical activities of the hip fracture survivors been followed up in the hip fracture registry, and that we have published again in the Archives of Osteoporosis during the last year. So I should say that we have made this fairly a good work. We have done some good work in the research related to fragility fractures in Sri Lanka during the last 2-3 years. But our main emphasis is that during the research we found that there's a certain amount of care gap given for the particular hip fracture patients, and the main care gap that we identified were one is that the delay in admitting patients following hip fracture. And then the second main concern was that the delay in surgery, and also that the number of patients who had a surgery was only about, let's say, 50%. So about 50% patients were managed conservatively, and of course they had a poor outcome when you compare the patients who had surgery. So this is one of the major concerns that we have. And also that we found that there's the involvement of internist or geriatrician in the initial assessment of the patient does not happen always. And as a result, the patients do not get evaluated sufficiently so that the surgery, for them to have early surgery. So the current focus on the fragility fracture network of Sri Lanka is to find out the ways that we can close these gaps, and particularly with regard to the delay in the admission time and the delay in the surgery, and also the high proportion of patients who are managed non-surgically, conservatively, and also that the possibility of involvement of a geriatrician in the initial assessment of the patients. So those are the main areas. And further, that we found that patients do not get mobilized sufficiently and early and following hip fracture surgery. So that is another area that we have been focusing. But all our work has been sort of, cut out by the COVID pandemic, which is sort of raising waves after waves in Sri Lanka. And we are on the third wave, actually, we are battling the third wave. So whatever the initiatives we have sort of, come up with, and then we had pushed backward, and as a result of this COVID problem. And but eventually we are hoping that we will be able to do some work. So basically that is the situation in Sri Lanka. So thank you very much for the opportunity given.
Thank you, Professor Lekamuasang, for that talk. And it's good that you emphasize the role of research in improving the care of our patients. And yes, the COVID pandemic is making research a lot more difficult at this point, but we really have to push on with that. Okay. Okay, finally, we have Professor Piyapat Dajpratam, who is a professor of rehabilitation medicine and a specialist in rehabilitation medicine at the Shri Raj Hospital and Mahidol Hospital in Thailand. Okay, finally, take it away, Dr. Dajpratam.
Thank you for your kind introduction. May I share the screen, please? Okay, I'm going to talk about the overview of fracture recovery program in Thailand. And I am a rehabilitation specialist, so I'm going to talk about rehabilitation perspective. Here is the multidisciplinary team of our fracture liaison service in our hospital. When we have a patient with hip fracture, we use the LINE application to activate everyone in the multidisciplinary team. The multidisciplinary team approach begins since pre-operative period in order to reduce post-operative complication and continues to post-discharge follow-up. There are orthopedists planning for surgery, anesthesiologists doing pain management, geriatrician, optimize medical issues, and rehab physician assessing and planning for continuing care post-operatively, and the nursing staff coordinating among the multidisciplinary team. For pre-operative assessment, the following history and risk factors will be obtained from the patients and their family, looking for comorbidities which would hinder the exercise program, such as cardiopulmonary, neurovascular, or musculoskeletal system. Meanwhile, the previous functional status will be acquired. Caregiver and family support are also assessed for the ability for continuing care and discuss about discharge destination and living environment. For environmental adaptation, we ask the family to take pictures of their home and send to the team via an email online application in order to get some advice for proper adaptation. Here is a QR code that explains how and where to take pictures, and we might discuss about home visits afterwards. For standard pre-operative program, we will deliver as follows: breathing exercise and cuff training, ankle pumping, and prepare muscle for post-operative mobility and ambulation. Post-operatively, early mobilization and optimization of rehabilitation program, such as range of motion exercise, weight-bearing training, strength and balance training, as well as functional training will be delivered, aiming at recovering mobility and independence and facilitating return to pre-fracture residence and long-term well-being. Before the COVID outbreak, caregiver and family are asked to engage in the program, as well as preparing for home program. For continuing and long-term care, we have to run through education about falling and risk factors and how to prevent recurrent falling. Progress and emphasize the exercise program in order to facilitate functional improvement to pre-fracture status and encourage them to increase physical activity level. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, the patients are afraid to come back for follow-up at the hospital with many reasons. Therefore, we are trying to set up the telemedicine for follow-up and deliver the exercise program. However, the telemedicine is an ongoing process since the hospital needs the good IT systems and our old age patients need proper devices, IT skills, and time to adjust to this new technology. So in conclusion, the fracture recovery program in Thailand begins since the admission and run through post-discharge until the patient reach their maximum potential improvement. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Dajpratam, for that talk. And it's very nice to see that you have instituted environmental assessment as part of your pre-operative assessment for risk for injury at home. Not really a lot of institutions do that, or even individual doctors do assess the environment of the patient for environmental risk for falling. Thank you everyone for that, for all of those talks and reactions. We now proceed with the last part of our program. Okay, may we call on Dr. Raul Michael Sembrano, who is the current president of the Philippine Academy of Rehabilitation Medicine, for a short reaction. Okay, Dr. Aksaway, can you will you be taking over already?
Okay, it is my honor to introduce our guest reactor in the final part of the Fragility Fracture Network Asia Pacific Third Pocket Meeting. He is the current president of the Philippine Academy of Rehabilitation Medicine. He is also the chief at the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine at the Philippine Orthopedic Center, a trauma and orthopedic center. May I call on Dr. Raul Michael Sembrano.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I was tasked to react, and at the same time, while listening to all of the lectures, which are very fruitful and very informative. In fact, one thing that stands out is the role of the physiatry and physiotherapy and rehabilitation in the treatment of fragility fractures. Now, as we all understand that rehabilitation should have instituted initially early on at the early mobilization. We all do agree to that, and because it actually reduces everything from sarcopenia problems all the way up to, in fact, all the way to the problems of immobility. Most often that we have seen also in our institution, the Philippine Orthopedic Center, we do get a lot of hip fractures also, and we do institute all of those. We do institute all of these, and I guess being part of an organization that helps assist and improve, we are very happy to be a part of this team, the Fragility Network, and at the same time, we are very much excited to collaborate and further other activities that you wish to, that we all can do to at least reduce the impact of these fractures on our elderly. And we also are very much happy that the focus now in the geriatrics is being done, because as we all know, the society, not necessarily not only in our countries, everybody is starting to age, and because we are starting to have a very long life, we'll tend to have all other problems as well. So in this, we're very happy, and I thank you again that we are included, and congratulations. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Sembrano. So actually, we've reached the last part of our meeting, and before I introduce the one who will give the closing remarks for this third pocket meeting, I would just like to react from the point of view of an orthopedic surgeon coming from a country with developing economy, as well as an affiliate research faculty of the Institute of Aging of our university. As you all know, in the Philippines, we still don't have really a national hip fracture recovery program, a nationalized one in our country. But it doesn't mean that there are no programs existing regarding fracture care. As I've mentioned, I'm very grateful to Professor De La Vega for mentioning about the Fit for Frail project of the Institute of Aging. Actually, this is an untapped resource. I think as we've been promoting with the FFN Regionalization Committee, this in the spirit of collaboration, we can actually expand existing programs. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think national FFNs can be truly catalyst in weaving the programs existing, being advocated by different societies in order to deliver a comprehensive interdisciplinary care for patients with the fragility fractures, which is really being advocated by the Fragility Fracture Network. So as we've come to the conclusion of our third packet meeting, it is important to mention that the FFN is really trying to build a collaborative spirit among the different specialties in order to expand orthogeriatric competencies in our region in support to the FFN's global call to action as well as the WHO's Decade of Healthy Aging. And the Regionalization Committee is continuously holding these activities, in collaboration with the FFN special interest groups. So again, if you like what we are doing, we would like to again invite you to register to the FFN's Global Congress. And at this point, I would like to introduce the president-elect of the Fragility Fracture Network. She's a geriatrician from the Fiona Stanley Hospital in Perth, Australia, and who is also the medical lead of the Electronic Medical Record Program, team of the Strategy and Governance Division of the Western Australia Department of Health. Professor Hannah Seymour. Hannah?
Thanks, Iwan. And really, I think there's just two really key messages to get across in these closing remarks. I think just acknowledging everybody's hard work in these really, really difficult times, and knowing that everyone in each of your countries is struggling with different challenges, mainly related to COVID. So really pleased to see so much enthusiasm still for what's our core business, which is looking after older people with fragility fractures. Two things. First of all, Owen, just to really thank the FFN Philippines team, as well as the University of the Philippines, Manila, Department of Rehab Medicine, Department of Orthopedics, and the Manila National Institute of Health, Institute of Aging for really, I know how much effort it takes to organize one of these meetings. So thank you so much to all of your team for doing that today. And then the second thing is really just to encourage people to go out and register for the Congress in Toronto. Owen and Dave Marsh have advocated so strongly for the fees to be reduced significantly for people in developing economies. And really, FFN is really committed to improving care across the world, but we can only do that if we're financially sustainable. So really, please do encourage people to register for the Congress. In these really challenging times, it's important that that's a success. There's some great speakers and a great program, and it will be preceded by the regional meeting, which is great value again. So please do encourage people to attend. And really, that was the main message of these closing remarks. But really, thank you to everybody for attending on a Saturday afternoon. I know everybody's busy, and continue all your hard work in improving the care for older people across Asia Pacific. So thank you again.